Hello, and welcome to carbonwhy, the channel that's catered to those who are avid lifelong learners. My channel explores the how, what, where, why the world works the way it does. Make sure to hit the like and subscribe button so that you can get notified of my next video. In this week's episode, we find out, is Texas becoming the new California? Texas, the Lone Star State. It's huge, iconic, and Texans are proud people. And lately, it's been attracting a growing number of businesses and billionaires who prefer it to places like California. People are flocking to Texas in droves. Everyone wants that freedom to chart their own course and the independence the state promises. More than that, Texas is huge, there's room to grow, and there's a friendly business environment going on there too. Big companies like Tesla have already made the move. The company is building a new gigafactory in Austin. Oracle has already moved its headquarters to Texas, and Apple is building its second largest campus in the state as well. Places like CBRE and Charles Schwab both recently relocated from California to Dallas, Texas. And Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is planning to make the move to Houston. Even Governor Abbott mentioned a possible US headquarters in Texas. Everyone who is anyone wants to be in Texas. The lockdown has had some interesting effects. With work-from-home orders, people can be employed with companies based in other states but yet living right in Texas. And with the real estate costs around a third of that of the Bay Area, the population boom is no surprise. In February 2021, the power grid was decimated by historic winter storms. But long before that, Texas was the place to be. The state was experiencing a major boom. And the state's Economic Development Agency says that since the lockdown hit, there has been a massive increase in corporate relocations to the state, with nearly 200 projects in the works by the end of 2020. Some attribute that to the lack of government interference in the running of businesses in Texas compared to places like California or New York. Texas and California are the two largest states in the US, with a fifth of the total population spread amongst the two states. But while California's population and job growth slowed during the lockdown, Texas did quite the opposite. Texas welcomed more residents than any other state in 2020. The lack of income tax has worked to attract many wealthy individuals like Joe Rogan, Elon Musk, Drew Houston, and Joe Lonsdale. Texas has the 9th largest economy in the world, and the state has always been a major business hub. In CNBC's ranking of top business states, Texas is ranked second, and the longtime financial capital of the state is Dallas. Toyota and State Farm are among the many companies that are or have already made the move to Dallas, Texas. Manufacturing is huge in Central Texas. Houston is home to oil and energy, where major names like Exxon and Shell have been since the early 1900s. Texas has been the country's #1 exporter for 18 consecutive years because of the oil and gas found there. The state's Economic Development Corporation says Texas is home to 50 Fortune 500 headquarters, over 1,600 foreign-owned companies, and 2.7 million small businesses. The state's civilian workforce of 14 million is second only to California's 18.7 million. The world-class educational institutions are another major reason why so many want to move to Texas, with schools like the University of Texas, UT Austin, Texas A&M University, and so much more. Data from the US Postal Service shows that Texas is the second most popular place for people leaving the Bay Area during the lockdown. The cost of living in Texas is nowhere near the ridiculously high price in places like California or New York. So for many, Texas is a place they can actually come to and make a decent living. When you think of big tech, California is the state that comes to mind, right? But Texas has a rich history of tech businesses too. Texas Instruments pioneered the development of silicon transistors out of Dallas in the 1950s. The 1980s saw the formation of Compaq and the development of the first portable laptop-sized computers in Houston. And popular tech brand Dell was founded by a college freshman in 1984. IBM has had a major presence in Austin since the 60s, and Microsoft remains a major employer in the Dallas area. With such a big presence from Apple, Tesla, and Oracle, will Austin become the new Silicon Valley? Joshua Baer, founder and CEO of Capital Factory, says Texas wants to learn from Silicon Valley, but it doesn't want to be Silicon Valley. Bayo Goswami, the founder of Bootstrap Austin, says people just love being there, and that is what drives tech companies to move there. Some say the major difference for tech companies starting up in Texas versus in California are the funding models. In Austin, what happens is a lot of bootstrapping, people build from the ground up with mainly just personal funding. But in California, just an idea is enough for funding to be granted. Venture capital in Texas is nowhere near what is available in California. In 2019, California had $65.6 billion in venture capital investment, the highest of any state compared to the measly $3.7 billion Texas came in fifth with. There are still some investors that only invest in Silicon Valley, but what we're seeing is more and more investors who are willing to invest in other places like Texas. Investors like Joshua Bear say that funding a startup in Austin has gotten much easier. Bear believes the lockdown pushed people over the edge, to the point where the huge influx of people, capital and ideas are happening much faster and easier. Lloyd Armbrust, founder and CEO of Armbrust American, says putting together his company would have been impossible to do in Texas 7 years ago. In 2020, Armbrust launched a PPE manufacturing company in an Austin suburb called Pflugerville. It produces up to 1.2 million masks per day. He says there is no way he would have started up in California because of the regulations. The Pflugerville Economic Development Group offered him more than $1,000 for each job he brought to the area. And Austin offers similar incentives for companies to move to the area, like big property tax reductions at Samsung's proposed new chip area. Armbrust first moved to Austin in 2011 to relocate an earlier company from the Bay Area. He says that hiring was the main reason for the move because there was a higher access to highly educated and qualified people. There was also very little competition. The Bay Area made it very difficult to compete with, thanks to companies like Facebook and Uber. Since 2017, over 200 companies have relocated to Austin, and more than 70 of them came from California. Elon Musk's SpaceX is expanding in South Texas, where it already has a launch site. The Tesla Cybertruck will be built in a new gigafactory in Austin, and Musk himself moved his personal home from LA to Austin. The Boring Company is also moving to Texas and opening up shop right next to Armbrust American. But as more people move to Texas, getting around the huge sprawl means more traffic. Austin's infamous I-35 is known for its terrible traffic. But a toll road with the country's highest speed limit, 85 miles per hour, offers one alternative to the I-35. There's also a $20 billion high-speed rail project in the works as another alternative. The speed rail would go the 200 and something odd miles from Dallas to Houston in 90 minutes. This is a pretty big deal because Texas is a big state. At 1.6 times the size of California, it's the second largest state after Alaska. And all that Texan land is a big pull for manufacturers. There's plenty of room for manufacturing sites to be built and development to occur, which of course would lead to cheaper rates and rents. That Texas cowboy stereotype couldn't be more wrong. The state has a lot of cultural variety. Carbonwhy, who grew up in Texas, says there's a diversity that's hard to top in a way that many don't really think Texas is. Another reason why many just love Texas is the lax gun laws. Colin, a gun rights activist, says he's allowed to exercise his right to use a gun without unnecessary restrictions in a way that is nearly impossible anywhere else in the US. And whether it's individual rights or business-friendly regulations, the Texas government has a reputation of being hands-off, which for many expresses the high value they place on freedom and independence. One example of how other states approach regulation is seen in how California handled the lockdown as compared to Texas. The Californian government actually shut down a mask manufacturing facility during the height of the lockdown. When Elon Musk openly defied shutdown orders and reopened his plant in Fremont, California in May 2020, the county pushed him to shut down production and Elon threatened to leave California altogether. Freedom from regulations was one of the reasons behind Musk's move to Texas. The lax lockdown restrictions and regulations in Texas allowed businesses to stay open, as compared to California. But the hands-off approach to lockdown regulations has left Texas with a higher death rate than California. And despite warnings from Biden's officials, Governor Abbott lifted the statewide mask mandate and business capacity limits on March 10th. But Austin did not immediately follow suit. Moving to Texas does have its perks though. The political climate there means less taxes. Texas is one of the few states with no income tax, and when you compare that to California's high income tax rate of 13.3%, it's easy to see why so many are moving to Texas. It's not just a lower cost of living, but also a lower cost of doing business. Texas is ranked the 11th best state for business in the Tax Foundation's 2021 State Business Tax Climate Index, whereas California came in 49th. New families and young people hoping to have large families and big houses in places with good schools in California are finding it very difficult. And former Texas residents who are living in California are finding that they prefer the tax systems in place in Texas, like the property tax being 1.7% for everyone and no income tax at all. But Texas does have high utility costs. For former Austin resident Brett Older, the connection fee for water was around $12,000 and he paid between $200 to $250 for the overall water bill. While housing is still far cheaper in Texas than in California, the population boom is definitely taking its toll on the Texas housing market. Austin homes in January 2020 were up by almost 24%, and inventory was at a record low. The Census Bureau's list of the fastest growing large cities showed Frisco, Texas on top. Over 43% of Frisco homeowners have lived there for less than 10 years. Texas took 6 of the top 15 spots, while Irvine was the only California city that made the list. The housing market in Texas is increasingly becoming competitive, and the newcomers are coming in and pushing out the people who have lived there for generations. Lloyd Armbrust says it's almost like a form of gentrification, especially with the way the tax system works. And property taxes in Texas rise with the value of the home, so housing demand raises taxes for current homeowners. Armbrust says what's happening is almost like a gentrification of Texas' real estate model, and he says that it is ultimately a good thing because it would generate wealth for everyone when more businesses enter the market and are paying a lot more than minimum wage. But we can't not mention the heat and humidity when we talk about Texas. Texas has 3 straight months of heat, with no reprieve. Heat so bad that it's led to terrible droughts and wildfires just like in California. And Texas also has to deal with hurricanes too. The deadliest natural disaster in US history was a sudden hurricane in 1900 that hit Galveston, killing over 8,000 people. Hurricane Harvey in 2017 killed at least 68 people and flooded more than 300,000 structures, causing $125 billion in damage. And more recently, in February 2021, an unprecedented winter storm killed at least 80 and left 4.4 million residents without power and over 7 million without clean water for days. The Texas government believes in small government and less regulations, which for many is all good until disasters like the 2021 winter storm strikes and the state is left with $50 billion in lost property and insurance losses for businesses. Texas is the only state in the country that's disconnected from the 2 national grids that the rest of the country relies on mainly to avoid federal regulation. Some blame the grid failure on Texas' need for independence and less regulations. And increasing population will create an increase in demand for energy, but the infrastructure just hasn't kept up with it. By early March 2021, huge power companies had to file for bankruptcy after Texas' free market power grid system led to bills reaching the billions. When a company is looking to move to Texas, the state's critical infrastructure will be high on the checklist when considering the move. And many believe the grid failure is definitely going to impact the decision for many businesses wanting to move to Texas in the future. Some Democrats say the fallout from February's storm can be the catalyst that turns Texas into a blue state. The big cities in Texas are already Democratic, so some say it's not a question of if, but a question of when. There's a catchphrase in Texas for those who don't want to see a political change in Texas that goes, "Don't California my Texas," which means don't come to Texas because you like the lack of income tax rates, but then vote for the same people who want to institute high income tax rates. The trend is undeniable, but debate remains about whether it will actually have an effect on Texas in the long term. Texans are proud people, and they demand that their culture be respected. They don't want their way of life gone because of the recent population boom. Texans want newcomers to appreciate what Texas is and the freedom it stands for. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, please like and subscribe and watch these videos that might pique your interest. Thank you for your support.